Hello everyone, welcome to NgRx series. My name is Rafiq and I'm a software engineer at Cisco. This series is not about what, it's about how. How to create a reducer, selector, effects and action. I will try to make this series as simple as possible. I'm not going to bore you with tons of definitions and documentations. In fact, this series is more about coding than slides and presentation. So let's get into it. Before we proceed, let's add the necessary tools which will help us to debug the store. In this case, a Chrome extension called Redux DevTools. This Chrome extension will allow us to trace the action and debug the state changes. I have set up a new Angular project with a basic template created using Angular material. This demo app will have an input and a card layout which will display a list of to-dos when we add them. Now let's get started. Install the NgRx package using the ngadd command or other package managers like npm or yarn. Once the dependencies got installed, it will update the configurations in app modules, but our application uses standalone API, so it will update app.config. If you see, it says provide store, which is a part of NgRx store. We also need to add store DevTools package so that our application can interact with the Chrome extension which we installed earlier. If you notice the app config, it will have the configuration updated. Reducers. Reducers are the function responsible for managing state changes in the application. Let's create a folder called store and a new file inside the folder called as todo.reducers.ts. This will contain the states and the structure. Create a constant to do reducer. To create a reducer, the function is create reducer. Let's import it. It will take initial state as a first parameter. The initial state is a default value which we will give to the state. So let's create initial state, constant initial state, and since our is a to-do application, we will create a to-dos array. It will have a string of arrays. When we check the console, there is no state created. That is because the application doesn't know which reducer to use. So we have to tell the application to use this file as a reducer. Let's go to app config. Provide store is the function which allows us to register the reducers. It takes object as a parameter where the key is the name of the reducer and the value is the reducer itself. Let's give it a name, my to-do store as the key, and the value is to-do reducer, which we have created. So if you go back to the browser and check, the state is initialized. It has a default value which we have defined in provide store, and it has the object to do's array. Right? This is the reducer which we have created, and we have given a initial state, a default value. Now, how can the component access and get the data from the store and render it on the screen? For that, selectors come into play. The selectors get the data from the store and allows us to filter it, manipulate it, add validation or checks, and whatever desired result you are expecting. Then return it back as the observables. You can then subscribe to this selector and get the data whenever there is a state change happens. So let's create a selector. Create a new file as todo.selector.ts. create a constant, select to-dos. Create selector is the function which allows us to create a selector. The first parameter typically refers to one or more input selectors or feature selectors. These selectors are used to retrieve specific pieces of the state from the store. The second parameter is a projector, which allows us to change the format of the output, because in some cases you want the return type has array or object or any booleans. So let's create a function. We will get the state as a parameter, and we will access the state and return my to-do store. We are getting a lint error because it doesn't have type. For now, let's keep it any. This my to-do store will be passed to the second parameter, which is a projector function, or we can say output format function. So we will get the object as a parameter my store, and we can simply access the to-dos from my store. Now that we have created the selectors, let's go back to the app component. Now we will import global store. You can inject this store using the constructor, the traditional way of doing it, or you can simply use inject function, which is part of Angular core. Using this store, now we can select the selector which we have created and assign it to the to-do list. Since selector is an observable, we have to subscribe it. We can subscribe to this observables from the HTML by using async pipe. This will subscribe and unsubscribe based on the component lifecycle. Let's add some predefined data in the initial state, and also we will log it to see if our selector works. Let's go back to the component. We will add a pipe, and then we will tap it and add the console log. So whenever there is a change in the state, this log will be printed. So if you see, it prints an empty array. That's expected because we don't have the data in the store. So let's add some initial value, the default value for the store. Static to do some other to do. So when you refresh, it prints the default value. So now if you see, it reads the data from the store. Now let's update the list. In order to update the store, we need an action. An action is simply an event emitter that our reducer listens to. So when the reducer receives the event, it updates the state based on the parameter received. Now let's create the action file, todo.action.ts. Export the action. To create an action, we will use create action method from NgRx store. Create action method accepts two parameters. The first parameter is the type, which is the name of the action, and this is a required parameter, and it is used to distinguish different actions in the application. The second parameter is props, which we will see later in the course. Go to app component file. Inside on new item change, this is the method when user enters something in the input box. This method will get triggered. Here let's invoke the action. This dot store dot dispatch. So dispatch is the method which will emit the action, and we will import add new to do action which we have just created. and it's a method you need to use parenthesis. Now, when you call add new to do action method, this will send the object which we have created, which will have type and the props, and the store dot dispatch use this object to emit the event which our reducer is going to listen. So now whenever there is a change in the input, our store will dispatch the to do action event. Let me type emit. So if you see, whenever I type, the event get emitted. Now we have to listen this event to update the data. But how to send the data using the action, right? For that, we need to use the second parameter, that is the props. Now props is used to define the payload of the action, using which we will send the data so that our reducer can get the data and update the store. So let's create the props. To define a prop, we will use prop keyword. There we have to define the type of the data which you will send. In this case, it's a to-do text, which is a string. And it's a method, so we have to use the parenthesis. That's it. So let's go back to app component. We need to pass the properties as the parameter of the action. Now our reducer needs to listen to this event. For that, let's go to reducer file. Create reducer function takes initial state as the first argument and a series of on function has subsequent arguments. On function takes two arguments. The first parameter is the action and the second parameter is the reducer function, which will take current state and the action payload as the parameter and returns a new state. And to get the payload from the action, we need to use the second parameter, which is a props. So first let's create an interface for the state. So to do state, to do's, which will be array of string, and then let's assign it to initial state, also the parameter. Now reducer function is a pure function, so you can't mutate the state directly, but you have to create a copy of it and then update the data and return the state. So let's create a constant temp to do, which will have the state of to do's. We will get the to do text from the props payload and push it to temp to do, and then we will assign it to the to do's state. If we try to mutate the state directly without taking a copy, then it will throw error because we can't mutate the data directly. We have to take a copy of it, manipulate it, and then return the updated state. To take the copy of the data, let's create a spread operator, triple dot state dot to do's, and then to do text, which will append the new item in the list. Also let's remove the default items. We no longer need it. If you see, our store is currently empty. We don't have any data. Let's try to enter a new item. My first to do, enter. See, add new item action emitted along with the payload, and this will update our store. So when you check the state, right, it will have my first to do item. So I can add the item as much as I can. It will update the state. We have reached the end of our NgRx course. I hope you learned something today. If you did, please show me your thanks by clicking the like and subscribe buttons. If you have any question, please comment below. I will be glad to help you. Thank you and see you soon.